All right, welcome back, guys. In this series, I'm going to show you how I'm going to make a one-piece Model A quarter panel. This is for a 3031 Ford Model A two-door sedan. In this series, we're going to go over everything from laying the pattern out, which I did a pattern on a quarter for a Model A sedan a while back, so I'm going to put the link to that in the description so it's easier for you guys to find. But I'm going to take that pattern and then we're going to lay the pattern out on the sheet metal, transfer all our notes, get everything ready to shape, and then we're going to go over to the power hammer and we're going to shape everything on the power hammer and the planishing hammer, and just kind of normal how I do things here. I'm going to reiterate a little bit why I'm so heavy on using power equipment versus hand tools, and the biggest thing is being a professional metal shaper, you have to be very efficient and timely with your work. I could do the same thing that I'm going to do with the power hammer with basic hand tools, but it's just going to take me a lot longer and I'm not going to be as efficient. And dealing with client cars, I have to really focus on that efficiency and making sure that I'm spending my time wisely, and I'm not overcharging the client because I want to do things by hand this time. So that's why I really focus on using power equipment so I can be efficient, it's repeatable, and I can focus on getting the job done to a high level of fit and finish in a timely manner. So hopefully you guys understand why I focus so heavy on using power equipment, but the principles are the same. I've mentioned this in previous videos, that there are only 5 things we can do to metal other than melt it down or start over. Is we can shrink it, stretch it, cut it, bend it, and weld it. So in this series, we're going to cover all of those. We're going to shrink to get this shape. We're going to stretch to get this shape. We're going to bend to get the form in here and this lip on, and we're going to weld. So we've got shrink, stretch, cut. We're going to cut out our pattern. So we're going to go through the entire gambit of all 5 stages to build this part. And there was a little bit of pushback on, I think the last time I said that, those were the 5 things. You have to break that down into a more simple concept. Yeah, you can call it something different. You can cast, which you're melting it down and starting over, and you're pouring liquid metal into a form, so you're melting it down and starting over. You can draw the metal, which is a form of stretching, which you're stretching. You could upset metal, which is a blacksmith term, and that would be kind of shrinking. So, everything comes back. You can call it whatever you want, but those are the 5 common principles. Anything else that you want to call it or modify is just coming back into those 5 basic root terms that we're going to focus on, no matter how you want to rearrange them, how you want to, re-identify them with nomenclature, but we are going to focus on shrinking, stretching, cutting, bending, and welding. Those are your 5 principles to make anything you want out of metal. So stick around and we're going to get to laying this pattern out, but first up, I got to clean our sheet metal, and we'll do our normal 3-stage process where I go through and I clean it with rubbing alcohol, then I come back and I use spray-away glass cleaner, and then I go back over it with spray-away glass cleaner again with a clean paper towel to make sure that I've got all our grease and oil off. That way our tape sticks during our layout. So I think that's enough talking standing here, so let's get to it and we'll start laying our pattern out. So we've got our pattern here. We're just using standard 18 gauge cold finish steel. I usually like to use 19 gauge DQ or draw quality, but the cost on that material is getting so out of control. It went from like $110 to almost $300 a sheet. So I just switched back to using 18 gauge. It's a little springier than the 19 gauge is, but it's still workable. So that's the material we're going to use, is 18 gauge cold finish steel. So we have our pattern here that I've made, and we're going to position it on our panel or our blank sheet here, and I'm just going to leave a little bit of room around it because we're going to offset all of our edges. And when we made the pattern in that previous video, I went around and made notes of how much material I needed everywhere. So with paying attention to that notation, I can kind of position our pattern on the sheet where we're going to have enough material to work with. And we're going to take some magnets, and we're just going to start sticking down our pattern. And it's critical to make sure that your pattern is as flat and smooth as humanly possible. And I'm a little obsessive compulsive, so I like to roughly get my magnets evenly spaced. It just helps me kind of keep an eye on things better. It makes me feel better. So as I'm working, I'm just dragging my hand across, making sure I can try to get the paper as flat as I can. And if you have to move magnets a few times, that's all right. It's more important to ensure that you're getting your pattern nice and flat. So I've put a couple magnets here just across where our light line is for our shrinks in the back. I'll show you why I did that here in a few when we go to lay out our light line. You don't have to do it at this stage, but I like to do it just so I don't get kind of get distracted and forget to put those magnets there. All right, so everything's stuck down, and I'm just going to come back and make sure everything feels nice and tight up against our parent material there. So then we're going to offset our edges as noted. I like to try to work in 1/4 inch increments, so 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 1 1/4, and so on, because you can get masking tape in those increments very easily. You can get like 1/8 inch and 1/16 inch fine line as well, but that's a lot harder to lay out your lines. So if you can, stick to 1/4 inch increments. I would rather leave a little bit of extra material and then have to trim that off after the fact, but it's up to you how you want to do it. But I do that so I can offset all my edges with masking tape. It's easier than coming in and marking it and trying to move that edge over with a compass or a divider or anything else. So if we look at this edge, I've got a note that says add 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to start at one end, and I'm going to follow the edge of our pattern. And this is also a good time, like if you had a weird cut with your scissors, you can clean that line up a little bit. I'm just trying to take a little bit of an average of that cut line. So here, this edge is currently offset by 3/4 inch. And our note says 1.5 inches, so we're going to do another row of 3/4, and that'll give us our offset. And this is why it's super critical to make sure your metal is clean, because if not, your tape is going to stick in some places and not in others, and it's going to aggravate you when you're trying to lay these offsets out when the tape doesn't stick and you have to start over. So when you're doing these type of panels, especially larger, more complex panels, you want to be in a good state of mind. As weird and new agey as that sounds, if you're in a bad state of mind, or you're aggravated, or you have some kind of negativity in your mind, you're going to translate that into the panel, and something's not going to go your way, and then you'll get more aggravated and you'll be in a vicious cycle. So you want to clear your mind, do everything you can to prevent anything from becoming a distraction or an irritant, so you can focus on shaping the panel in the right state of mind. That way everything goes as smooth as humanly possible. So we'll talk a lot more about kind of the mentality of having to shape panels like this. I would say 30% is physical and the remainder is all mental. So really focus on, you know, letting this time be good to clear your mind and get in the zone to be able to shape this piece. So back to laying out our offsets here. Our back edge is noted for 3/4. So we just have to do 1 row of tape. And again, I'm using this if my cut lines with my scissors were a little wiggly, I can clean that up at this stage. So I'll try not to block the camera too much here. This front edge is also 3/4 offset. And don't be afraid to waste tape. I mean, tape is not cheap, but tape is cheaper and easier to deal with than metal. So I'd much rather waste tape than waste the metal. So this bottom edge, we're going to add 1 inch to that, and I'll have to go over and grab our 1/4 inch fine line tape. But I'm going to lay the rest of this out first. So it looks like I'm out of 1/4 inch fine line tape. So I'm just going to use this 1/8 since this is nice and straight, and I'll just run 2 rows of it. All right. So I'm going to come back with a razor blade and I'm going to trim all of our edges. And I've left this spot kind of sticking up because I wanted to show you guys one thing that I think is very important. But let me get these edges trimmed first, and then I'll reposition the camera and we'll kind of go over what we do in areas like that. All right, so I want to use this time to talk to you guys about some layout stuff that I find very, very important. A lot of this layout and patterning type work is super boring, super monotonous, but it's super critical because you need to be very efficient, which is going to be a key term you hear over and over and over again, and you need to be precise. So the more precise you are, the more efficient you're going to become. And precise is very critical in metal shaping, because if you're just doing different things every time, you're going to get different results every time. And if you're not hitting your marks, whether they be shrink marks or body line marks or light line marks or cut marks, all of that stuff is going to be compounded, you know, especially on large panels like this. So being precise goes hand in hand with being efficient, because then the more precise you are, you're not going to have to relay out lines or remake parts as often. So we're going to try to dial back our precision to be super fine. So there's going to be a few things I want to talk about. And one thing is, like, I don't know if you can see it, but up here in this corner, it's a tighter radius with 3/4 inch tape. So if you can't see that, I'm not sure if I can see it on the camera there. Not very well, at least. I'm going to recreate that kind of down here, and we're going to talk about the way I like to lay out tape, because we're going to become more efficient with our tape and more precise with our tape. So say we have a tight radius we need to make with 3/4 inch tape. We're going to come up and we're going to make our radius there. So when I did that, I left my thumb on this side of the tape here to where it would leave essentially tucks, because we're stretching this outside edge of the tape just slightly, but the inside needs to shrink. So this is a critical point in your pattern layout and your offset edge, because it depends on how you want to lay this out. And if you just kind of come in and you fold the tape over like that, well, now you have a nice jagged line here, and see, now we're not even 3/4 of an inch offset here anymore. So when we go to mark this with our marker, we're going to get a super crooked edge, and our offset line is going to be borderline useless in my eyes. So we'll just do both sides. That way we've got one smooth side and one not smooth side to compare it to. And sorry if you guys find this boring, but I think it's very important. So, you know, here's our stretch side of the tape and here's our shrink side of the tape, and you can see how crooked that is. So for me, that's unacceptable. So I'm going to wipe this off with some lacquer thinner so we get a nice, fresh, clean spot to work. And we'll lay it out, and with this, just taking your time and thinking things through, you can make this better and way more consistent and precise. So it'll be a different radius just because I don't have anything laid out here. But the concept is the same. So we have these essential tucks here. So instead of just flattening over with your hand, you can take the end of your marker, and we're going to treat it just like when we're patterning or when we're shrinking our actual metal. I'm going to start here and just come over and subdivide these a little bit. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of guys watching like, this is a total waste of time. You know, you can't charge a client for this. Well, the way you have to look at it is you're going to spend an extra couple minutes here getting this dialed in, or you're going to spend more than a couple minutes correcting an issue later on down the road. So it's easier to correct these issues at the very beginning than later on down. So after I get these initial tucks, I just kind of take my fingers and start to push the tucks closed, working from our shrank edge out, just like when we shrink the metal, because we're essentially doing the same thing, and work on closing our tape tucks. And you may have seen me do that in a couple areas on the offset edge, because it wasn't nearly as drastic of a radius as this. But so now if we take our marker and we offset the edge, so there's our stretch edge of the tape, and here's our shrink edge of the tape. So when I peel that off there, it's going to be a pretty nice offset. So now everything's nice and parallel. We've got a little bit of deviation where the edge of the tape folded up, but not nearly as bad as it was on the other one where you just kind of rushed through and pushed it over. So to me, that's a big deal, and you really want to focus on getting your tape to lay down as flat and smooth as possible. And the other solution would be you could use like the plastic tape, because it bends a little bit more, but this tape is more expensive. You're still going to have the tuck issues unless you're using very narrow tape, and then you're going to, you know, this is 1/8 inch, so if we had to do a 3/4 inch offset, you're going to waste a whole roll of this tape, which is just a waste of time and money in my eyes, when this is pretty good. So from here, I wanted to talk about more precision stuff. So I'm just going to lay out a couple pieces of straight tape here. So when you lay out your offset lines, I like to use these ultra fine point Sharpies. I like to use blue. Blue holds up way better than any other color. And the reason I prefer that is because when you go to a cut on a cut line here, just naturally you're going to slightly drift to one side of the line to the other and then back in the middle. It's not going to be a perfectly smooth cut. It's just, it's hard. Your brain wants, you know, you're going to correct a little bit, change a little bit, and you're just going to drift. So if we use, say, an old Sharpie, that's got kind of a dull point, and we just drag that here is our offset line. And then on this piece, we're going to use a newer Sharpie that is not as beat up. And then here, we're going to use this ultra fine, and we'll peel the tape off. So you can see the line difference. So now this line is roughly, it's a hair, maybe 3/32. So now we're going to go from one side of the line through the center, back and forth over 3/32. Here this is slightly under, maybe a 1/16, maybe a hair under. And then this one is super fine. So we're dialing back our precision of our cuts. And that's why we're going to go through and we'll fine trim this with 10 snips. That way we can get right in there and we can focus on our line. So again, I know this stuff is boring and you might not think that it's valuable, but it really is. Once you start dialing everything back and getting things pulled back in to where you can focus on the little details, it's going to make things so much easier when you get into bigger panels and the bigger picture. Just like coming back and trimming off all our corners here with the tape. Do I need to do that? No, but it's easier just to come all the way around, and I know right where our corners need to be. Everything is clean and precise, and it just makes everything smoother later on down the road. And then you get in the habit of doing that. And you know, once things become habit, you'll do it over and over. You'll get better and better, more precise. Then it's second nature, and it'll be a repeatable process because you're always doing everything the same. So I think that's enough talking about this stuff, because I'm sure you guys are tired of listening to this little stuff that doesn't seem significant at this point. But focus on making your tape nice and even, and you know, kind of closing the tucks just like we do with the metal in our patterns, and then switching over to an ultra fine Sharpie to dial in your cut lines. So that's a big takeaway on this. So I'm going to get back to the pattern, and I'm going to close this in just like I did with our tape here, with putting some tucks in it, and then I'll go around and we'll lay out our lines, we'll rough cut it in the shear, and then I'll come back and we'll fine tune everything with snips. All right, so now that I've laid out all our cut lines on the outside, it's time to lay out like our light line and our shrink marks. So there's a couple ways you can do this. I'm going to use a center punch. That's kind of the way I prefer to do it. But the other option, if you don't want to put center punch marks in it, especially if you're using aluminum, because like in a lot of aircraft industry type stuff, you cannot do that. It'll potentially create a crack. You can put magnets just on this side of your light line, and you can kind of fold that up and you can mark it. I don't like it this way because I feel it's not as accurate, and this kind of ties back that you want to be precise, efficient, and you want to be repeatable. So I'm not going to mix it up, and I don't want to change the way I'm doing things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with our center punch here, and this is just a spring-loaded one that I really like instead of the push type that's preloaded internally. I like this one because you can focus on how hard you want it to hit. So I'm going to come into our pattern, and I'm going to mark on each shrink line and then in between each shrink line. And I'm not trying to hit it super hard, just enough to leave a witness mark. And this witness mark will come out later as we planish everything. It'll kind of fade it out, and you might have a very small dimple, but nothing I would be super concerned about. All right, so we've laid out this, and then I'm going to take one of our standard Sharpies because this isn't as critical as a cut line. So I'm just going to come on our tape here, and I'm going to mark where our shrink points are. And then we can flip up. Let's see, I'll just roughly mark that one and that one. Just flip it up and make sure we can see all our reference points. And then at this point we can peel our pattern back off and we can finish laying out everything we've got here for our shrinking, which is the most critical part. All right, so we're going to take our pattern off and just set it to the side for now, being careful not to tear it or fold it or wrinkle it. So here, hopefully you guys can see it. I don't know how good the video is going to be, but I can see and feel my little center punch marks here. So what I'm going to do is take our tape, and again, I'm going to take the average of these because our mark here is decently wide marker mark. We might get off of that center line slightly. So it's better just to take an average and make sure that your line is nice and smooth. You know, if it's got a bunch of kind of chunky spots in it, you know your light line's not going to have that. So this is the time to kind of address that and make sure it's a relatively smooth line. And it feels pretty straight, looks pretty straight, and we're on the average of all of our center punch marks. So from here, I'm just going to take our regular Sharpie and draw our light line. And I'll go ahead and label that. Now we can grab a straight edge and we can connect our lines of where our shrinks need to be, and we can label those. We want to make sure, because we did go every other line, or on the line and in between, that we want to make sure that our shrink marks are pulling close to perpendicular to the radius of our light line. That way it pulls our shrinks in the direction we need them pulled. So I'm just going to come in now that I've got the first one and make a note on each dot to make it a little bit faster. And these, since we didn't have a punch mark and I just marked it on both pieces of tape, we can do those as we come across. Hopefully you guys are finding this informative and not super boring. When I teach my classes here in the shop, I tell everybody patterning and layout is the most boring, tedious part, but it's also the most critical, because if you can't accurately pattern a part and then lay that part out, you're going to really struggle to be able to make the finished part, because you don't have anything to go off of. And if you do quick, sloppy patterns and layouts, you're going to get quick, sloppy parts. And that goes back into being precise, efficient, and repeatable. So that's super critical. I came in and I wrote SH next to each one of these lines, which is my shorthand for shrink, which I've mentioned in other videos. So some stuff, if you haven't watched any of my other metal shaping videos, you might want to head back and just check them out, just in case I forget to mention something I'm doing in these. A lot of times my hands and my body know more than my mouth does, so I'll just kind of get to doing things and babble on. So it's a good idea just to watch the other videos in my metal shaping series, and I might talk about the same things in a different way, or mention things that I'm doing that I've missed in this video or others. So from this point, we can use our pattern as a reference. So I'm not going to worry about our 6-inch radius here because I can reference that, but I am going to put that this is a 12-inch radius. So 12-inch R, 12-inch R, just like our pattern. And then up here is going to be roughly 36-inch radius in each direction. And this is just extremely low crown, and it's a blendable part, and I'll check all of that with sweeps against our old quarter and up against the car to make sure it flows with the car. I would much rather have a quarter panel that has the wrong radius or the wrong sweep compared to the original, but flows with the car and with the part. So you always want to focus on what the end product looks like and how everything flows together on the car and on the chassis versus making an exact replica part, unless you're doing a car that was a flaw or a design cue originally and you're going for points and accuracy for like a concourse type restoration. Most of the stuff I don't do concourse stuff, so it's all about fit and finish and flow of the panels to one another. So from here, we can peel off our masking tape, and we can rough cut out our blank here on the power shear, and then we can come back and start trimming it with snips. And I think that'll about wrap up episode 1 of making the Model A quarter panel. So stick around and we'll get this thing cut out and we'll keep moving forward. All right, so we've got our main quarter blank here all rough cut out with the power shears, and now I can come back in with my Midwest brand tin snips, and I'm going to come in and follow our ultrafine Sharpie line all the way around, get everything nice and trimmed, and I'll come back and I'll use a large Vixen file just to deburr everything. One note, I'm not going to cut out the wheel well here yet. When shaping this piece, this is going to become a weak spot, and I don't want that to fold up on itself. I want a little bit of support, so I drew a line here that kind of cuts up a little bit to reduce a little bit of weight, but also keep enough material here to help keep this rigid. So I'm going to go ahead, put my earbuds in, and start trimming around this, and we'll get everything moving forward, and then we'll head over to the hammer and start shaping. So I get asked all the time, why do I tin snip all of the edges for my final cut lines instead of using like a Beverly shear or a pair of electric shears? The reason for that is, like I've talked about, we want to reduce our margin for error, get everything dialed back in so we have less things to correct later on. So if I use power shears, you know, it's going to be harder to get in here and keep them straight, and there's moving parts. So with tin snips, it's a little bit slower of a process, and some of this might be a recap for some of you guys. This might be new information. So you can cut really slow and precise, especially with these Midwest's offset. I can, you know, turn them upside down from what most people think to run, and I can get right up on here and just kind of take my time, not fully closing the snips with each squeeze, and I can focus on hitting that ultra fine Sharpie line, and it saves with having to file the edge completely straight because it's pretty straight to begin with, so that saves time not having to take out a bunch of waves. So I'm a big believer on final cutting everything with tin snips as you go. So that's my reasoning on cutting everything out with tin snips, and I'll finish trimming this out and we'll be about ready to start shaping. Everything's all trimmed out. I ran the file around the outside just to knock some of the burrs off and make sure there weren't any super sharp edges I'm going to cut my hands on. So next up, we're going to set the power hammer back up to do thumbnail shrinking, but I'm going to save that for the next episode, because right now I think we're about the 35-minute mark on this video, and I think that's good enough for the first episode of this series on making a quarter panel from Model A. So hopefully you guys found a lot of information in this video, and it's been helpful to see how some of the more boring processes are done, but to see how critical and important they are to do them properly. So like I said, this wraps up episode 1 of the Model A quarter panel, and I want to deeply thank you guys for checking out my channel and watching these episodes. If you can, just drop me a comment down in the comment section. Let me know what you think of this style video, just like the wheel well videos. It's a little bit more laid back, underproduced, and just really working on giving you the information to where you can put these principles into practice at home. So just leave me a comment, let me know what you think, how I can be better, what kind of stuff you want to see in the future. If you can, please subscribe, comment, like, tell a friend so I can continue this channel to grow, especially if you appreciate what I'm doing. Also check out my Patreon if you want to help support what I'm doing with the videos in another way. Also check us out on Facebook and Instagram for more constant updates instead of these weekly updates on the video series. So again, thank you guys so much for checking it out and watching, and stay tuned for the next episode where we actually get to shaping this piece. So we'll catch you guys on the next one.